The sun was just starting to rise over the horizon, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and orange, when the small private plane taxied down the runway. The young pilot, tall and lean with a calm but determined face, ran through his checklist one last time. He had flown hundreds of planes before, but something about this trip felt different. The passenger, a confident and beautiful CEO, sat quietly in the luxurious cabin, checking her tablet for emails and updates. She was used to controlling everything around her, always moving fast, always planning, always prepared. Today she had to trust someone else completely. The plane lifted off smoothly, slicing through the morning mist. The pilot focused on the instruments, keeping the plane steady. The CEO admired his calm demeanor. She had flown many times, but few pilots carried themselves with such quiet confidence. She tried to relax, adjusting her seat and looking out the window at the sprawling landscape below. It was beautiful, peaceful even, and she let herself imagine that maybe this trip would be a brief escape from her busy life. The flight started normally, with the plane climbing to a comfortable cruising altitude. The pilot chatted briefly with the CEO, asking about her trip plans. She spoke with poise and clarity, describing a critical business meeting on an island a few hours away. He listened attentively, offering occasional advice about the weather, flight duration, and other technical details. She felt a flicker of admiration for his expertise. It was rare to find someone so young yet so professional. As the plane glided smoothly, a sudden jolt shook it violently. The pilot's heart skipped a beat. He quickly scanned the instruments, his calm mask barely hiding his concern. Something was wrong with the engine. The plane trembled again, and the CEO gripped her armrest, her eyes wide. The pilot immediately reassured her, keeping his voice steady. He explained that there was a technical problem, but they could manage it. The CEO nodded, trying to appear calm, though fear was starting to creep in. He adjusted the throttle, attempting to stabilize the plane. Another jolt, stronger this time, sent a chill down both their spines. The pilot realized they were losing altitude faster than expected. He glanced at the map, searching for the nearest land where they could attempt an emergency landing. The CEO watched him silently, realizing for the first time that no amount of wealth or power could change the fact that they were completely at the mercy of fate. Moments later, the plane's nose dipped suddenly. The young pilot acted instinctively, correcting the trajectory, but the engine sputtered and then failed completely. Panic flashed across the CEO's face, but the pilot remained focused. He instructed her to fasten her seatbelt tightly, to brace for impact, and to stay calm. The plane descended rapidly, cutting through clouds, heading toward an unknown stretch of forested land. The crash was rough, but not immediately deadly. The plane skidded through trees, twisting slightly, and finally came to a halt near a small clearing on a remote island. Both the pilot and the CEO were shaken, covered in dust and minor scrapes. The pilot quickly unbuckled his seatbelt and checked himself for injuries. Seeing that he was relatively unharmed, he rushed to the CEO's side. She was trembling, her usually perfect appearance now smudged with dirt and a hint of blood from a small cut on her forehead. He helped her out of her seat, supporting her as they climbed out of the wrecked plane. Around them, the island stretched out wild and untouched, with thick trees, rocks, and a distant beach. There was no immediate sign of human habitation. The CEO's eyes widened as she took in the isolation. Fear mingled with awe. She realized they were completely alone, dependent entirely on each other. The pilot assessed their situation quickly. The plane was beyond repair. There was limited food and water on board. They had basic supplies, but they would have to find natural resources if rescue did not come soon. He remained calm, masking his worry. He reassured the CEO that they would survive, that they just had to stay focused and work together. She nodded, impressed by his leadership but still scared. She had faced challenges in boardrooms and negotiations, but nothing like this. They began exploring the immediate area, marking the location of the wreckage and finding a small, relatively safe spot to set up a temporary shelter, using parts of the plane and nearby natural materials. The CEO struggled at first, unsure how to help, but the pilot guided her patiently. He taught her simple survival tasks: how to collect water from leaves, how to gather edible fruits, and how to stay safe in the unfamiliar environment. She followed his instructions, slowly adapting to the reality of their situation. As they worked together, tension and fear began to transform into mutual respect. The CEO, used to giving orders, was learning to trust someone else entirely. The pilot, who had always been independent and self-reliant, discovered that he could rely on another person too. Small moments like her laughter when she successfully built a makeshift fire, or the way he smiled at her determination, created a subtle bond between them. Night fell quickly on the island, bringing with it a chorus of unfamiliar sounds, insects buzzing, distant animal calls, the rustling of leaves in the wind. They sat close to the fire, sharing the warmth and silently acknowledging the strangeness of their new reality. The CEO admitted softly that she had never felt so vulnerable in her life. The pilot nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He shared a little about himself, his past flights, and the reasons he became a pilot. For the first time, they were connecting not as a CEO and a pilot, but as two people caught in the same unexpected situation. Sleep came fitfully. The pilot stayed awake longer, listening to the night, ensuring they were safe. He occasionally checked on her, seeing her asleep and realizing how much he cared about her safety. It was a protective feeling he had never expected to experience. She in turn woke a few times, glancing at him with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. There was a silent acknowledgement between them. They depended on each other, and that dependency was changing them both. The next morning, they continued their exploration of the island. Searching for fresh water and edible plants, they discovered a small stream and a few fruit-bearing trees. Their teamwork improved as they learned each other's strengths and weaknesses. She was resourceful and quick-thinking in unexpected situations, while he remained calm and focused under pressure. Together they made an effective team. Throughout the day, small conversations revealed layers of their personalities. The CEO spoke of her childhood dreams and the pressures of running a major company. The pilot shared stories of his early days as a trainee, the excitement and fear of flying, and the challenges he faced to prove himself. They laughed over minor mishaps, shared moments of awe at the island's natural beauty, and slowly felt a connection growing beyond mere survival. By the end of the day, they had created a small, semi-sheltered area near the stream. Using branches, leaves, and parts of the wreckage, they collected enough water and fruit to last the night. Exhausted but determined, they sat together by the fire again. Words were sparse, but glances and gestures spoke volumes. They were beginning to realize that what started as fear and necessity was slowly turning into something more personal, something neither of them had expected. As darkness fell for the second night, they sat quietly, listening to the island around them. The CEO finally broke the silence, saying, "I never thought I would survive something like this. Fatima, I'm glad I'm here with you." The pilot looked at her, a faint smile on his face, and replied, "We'll get through this. Together." There was a sincerity in his voice that made her heart beat a little faster. They settled down to sleep, closer than before, a sense of shared trust growing between them. The pilot kept one eye open, ensuring their safety, while the CEO, for the first time, allowed herself to relax completely, knowing she was in capable hands. The island, once a symbol of isolation and fear, was slowly becoming a place of connection and understanding. The days ahead would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. But in this first part of their journey, they had discovered something crucial. In the face of danger, amidst fear and uncertainty, human connection could grow, quietly and powerfully, between two very different people thrown together by fate. The morning sun rose slowly, casting golden light over the island. The young pilot and the CEO had survived their first night, but the reality of their situation had not lessened. They were stranded and the island was wild and untamed. The pilot rose first, moving quietly to check the surroundings. The stream nearby had enough water, but food was limited. He began to plan the day, thinking about what they needed to survive. The CEO woke to the sound of rustling leaves and the soft flow of the stream. She stretched and looked around, realizing that she had slept more peacefully than she had in years. The pilot noticed her waking and smiled gently, a wordless reassurance that they were both okay. She returned the smile, a mix of gratitude and newfound trust in him. After a simple breakfast of fruit and water, they set off to explore the island more thoroughly. The pilot took the lead, scanning for safe areas and potential hazards. The CEO followed closely, carrying a small makeshift bag with some supplies from the wreckage. At first, she was unsure how to contribute, but he encouraged her, teaching her how to identify safe plants and avoid dangerous ones. Each small task built her confidence and showed her that she could be more than just a passenger in life. they discovered a small grove of trees that bore edible fruits and some plants that could be used for basic medicinal purposes. The pilot was meticulous, carefully picking what they could use and storing it in a safe spot. The CEO tried to match his thoroughness, but her hands trembled slightly as she worked. He noticed but did not comment, allowing her to find her own rhythm. As the day progressed, they laughed over minor mistakes, like when she accidentally knocked down a pile of fruits or when he tripped over a hidden root. These small moments lightened the tension and created a sense of normalcy amid the wildness. As they walked deeper into the island, the pilot explained how to build better shelter and how to start a fire using natural materials. The CEO listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed her curiosity and willingness to learn. She was used to being in control, but here, she had to trust someone else completely. That trust created a bond that neither of them had anticipated. She began to see him not just as a skilled pilot, but as a reliable and caring companion. In the afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in from the sea. Dark clouds gathered and the wind picked up. The pilot quickly guided the CEO back to the shelter they had improvised near the stream. They reinforced it with branches and leaves, working together silently but efficiently. The rain began to pour, soaking them despite their efforts, but they were safe from the worst of it. Inside their shelter, they shared a blanket and huddled together for warmth. The storm raged outside, but inside, a sense of calm prevailed. They talked quietly, sharing more personal stories. Her childhood dreams, his first solo flight, and the challenges they had each faced in life. Each story revealed layers of their characters, making them feel closer. As the storm subsided, the pilot stepped outside to check the area. He returned smiling, showing that no serious damage had occurred. The CEO laughed softly, relieved, and the tension of the past few hours seemed to lift. They spent the rest of the day strengthening their shelter and collecting more resources. By evening, they had enough food and water to last another day, and the CEO's confidence had grown significantly. She realized that survival was not just about physical strength, but about patience, learning, and trusting another person. Night fell again, and the island was filled with the sounds of nocturnal life. The CEO sat close to the fire, watching the flames dance. She thought about how strange and unexpected this experience had been. She had always believed that control was everything, that her success depended on her ability to manage every situation. But here, control was impossible, and yet she felt a peace she had never known. The pilot noticed her contemplative mood and placed a reassuring hand on hers. She looked at him, startled for a moment, then smiled. The touch was simple, but it spoke volumes about their growing connection. They discussed the possibility of rescue. The pilot explained that they could signal passing ships or planes using smoke, reflective materials, or makeshift flags. The CEO eagerly helped, learning quickly how to create signals that could be seen from a distance. They spent hours preparing, experimenting with different methods, and laughing when things didn't work as planned. Each failure was met with patience and encouragement, further strengthening their bond. As days passed, they fell into a routine. Mornings were for foraging and exploring, afternoons for building and improving shelter, and evenings for fire and conversation. They shared tasks, learned from each other, and began to anticipate each other's needs. The CEO discovered a strength she hadn't realized she possessed, while the pilot discovered that he enjoyed sharing his skills and knowledge in a way that brought them both comfort and safety. Small moments of care and attention became significant. The pilot noticed when she was tired and encouraged her to rest. The CEO prepared small treats from gathered fruits to lift his spirits. They began to talk about hopes and dreams beyond survival, imagining what life might be like after rescue. These conversations were not just distractions. They were ways of understanding each other's values, fears, and desires. A quiet affection grew between them, built on trust, respect, and shared experience. One day, while exploring a dense part of the island, they came across a small natural spring. The water was clear and cool, providing a more reliable source than the stream near their shelter. They celebrated the discovery quietly, knowing that water was crucial for survival. The CEO collected water diligently, following the pilot's instructions, and they returned to their shelter feeling accomplished. Each small victory strengthened their sense of partnership and reliance on each other. They also began to observe the island's wildlife, learning which creatures were harmless and which required caution. The pilot explained basic tracking and observation techniques, and the CEO eagerly applied them. Their teamwork improved with each passing day, and the lines between teacher and student blurred as both contributed ideas and solutions. The CEO's intelligence and quick thinking complemented the pilot's experience and practical skills, creating a seamless partnership. Evenings were spent by the fire, sharing stories and reflections. The CEO spoke about her life before the crash, her career, family, and the pressures of high-level decision-making. The pilot listened patiently, sharing bits of his own journey and the challenges of being young in a demanding profession. Their conversations were honest and open, building emotional intimacy. The CEO began to trust the pilot not just for survival, but as someone who could understand and support her on a deeper level. On the 5th day, they faced another challenge. A sudden windstorm threatened to damage their shelter. They worked tirelessly together, reinforcing the structure and securing their supplies. The storm passed, leaving them exhausted but relieved. That night, sitting close to the fire, the CEO admitted her growing admiration for the pilot. He responded with gentle honesty, acknowledging that he too had come to care for her in ways he hadn't expected. The admission was simple, understated, but it shifted the dynamic between them. Their connection was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, respect, and a budding emotional bond. By the end of Part 2, the young pilot and the CEO had transformed from strangers caught in a disaster to a team capable of surviving and thriving in a harsh environment. Their relationship had deepened through shared experience, mutual respect, and growing affection. The island, once a place of fear and isolation, had become a backdrop for discovery, of resources, of courage, and of the unexpected closeness that could develop between two people when faced with adversity. Their journey was far from over, but the foundations of trust, partnership, and emotional connection were firmly in place. The morning light spilled over the island like a warm promise. The young pilot and the CEO had spent days surviving and learning to work together, and now a new hope flickered. From a high vantage point on a small hill, the pilot scanned the horizon with a practiced eye. He spotted what appeared to be a small ship far off in the distance. His heart skipped a beat and he turned to the CEO, trying to mask his excitement. She followed his gaze and the realization hit her at the same time. There was a possibility of rescue, and both felt a mix of relief and nervous anticipation. They quickly discussed a plan to signal the ship. Using dry leaves, reflective pieces from the plane wreckage, and their makeshift fire, they began preparing a large signal on a clearing visible from afar. As they worked, they moved with a sense of urgency, but also care for each other. The CEO had grown comfortable following his guidance, and her confidence had grown remarkably. She climbed trees to place reflective surfaces higher up, while the pilot built the fire to create smoke that would carry their signal. The teamwork felt instinctive now, their movements synchronized without words. The ship, distant as it was, seemed to respond to the smoke. They held their breath, hoping the vessel's crew would notice. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The CEO, who had once prided herself on control, now realized that patience was just as important as action. She watched the pilot, noting the calm determination etched on his face. In him she saw a steady confidence that anchored her own nerves. Finally, the ship changed its course slightly, signaling that it had seen them. Relief washed over both of them, and they hugged briefly, a mix of joy and lingering tension from the ordeal. The pilot reminded her to stay cautious. Rescue was near, but they weren't completely safe yet. They gathered their few remaining supplies, preparing to leave the island as soon as possible. The journey back to the ship wasn't simple. They had to navigate dense parts of the forest and cross a small stream. The pilot went first, scouting for danger, while the CEO followed closely. Each step was careful, deliberate, as they balanced excitement with caution. Along the way, they encountered signs of the island's wildlife, tracks, nests, and distant calls, but no immediate danger. Their combined vigilance kept them safe. Upon reaching the shoreline, the ship appeared closer now. A small boat approached from the vessel, carrying rescuers ready to take them aboard. The pilot helped the CEO into the boat first, ensuring she was steady despite the adrenaline. Then he climbed in himself, keeping a watchful eye on her and their surroundings. As the boat pulled away from the island, they took one last look at the place that had challenged them, transformed them, and brought them together. On board the ship, the rescuers checked them for injuries, offered food and water, and wrapped them in blankets. The CEO allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability, leaning on the pilot for support. He held her steady, guiding her to a safe seat, and offered quiet words of reassurance. She realized how much she had come to rely on him, not just physically, but emotionally. The bond formed on the island had deepened into a connection neither could ignore. As they sailed away, they shared small smiles and exchanged stories of their time on the island with the rescuers. They laughed about minor mishaps and recounted the challenges they had faced, but beneath the humor was a quiet pride. They had survived together, relying on each other in ways that few could imagine. Their teamwork had turned into mutual respect, and respect had quietly blossomed into affection. During the evening on the ship, the pilot and CEO found a moment to be alone. They sat on the deck watching the sun dip below the horizon. The gentle rocking of the ship and the soft colors of the sky created a peaceful atmosphere. The CEO spoke first, her voice low and reflective. She admitted that she had never imagined feeling this way about anyone, that the island had changed her perspective on life, trust, and human connection. The pilot listened attentively, feeling a warmth in his chest. He responded with quiet honesty, sharing his own realizations. He had always been confident in his skills as a pilot, but the island had taught him that courage was more than skill. It was about patience, care, and the willingness to protect someone else. And through it all, he had grown to care for her deeply, more than he expected. Their conversation was interrupted by the ship's captain inviting them to the ship's lounge for a brief meal. They accepted, grateful for the small comforts of civilization. Sitting together, they noticed that they naturally leaned toward each other, their presence providing comfort in a world that still felt unpredictable. They exchanged glances that conveyed unspoken feelings, a mutual acknowledgement of the bond formed through shared struggle. As night fell, the ship's gentle movement rocked them into quiet reflection. The CEO watched the stars, thinking of the island and the strange turn her life had taken. She realized that the experience had revealed her vulnerabilities and strengths in equal measure. The pilot sat beside her, noticing her thoughtful expression. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, a gesture that spoke volumes about his care and attention. She felt a flutter of warmth in her chest, a feeling she hadn't expected. Sleep was restless that night, filled with memories of the island, the challenges, the laughter, the small victories, and the moments of fear overcome together. Both the pilot and the CEO were exhausted, yet their thoughts kept returning to each other. They had survived the island, but the journey had created something stronger than survival, an emotional bond, a shared understanding, and the quiet beginnings of love. The next morning, the ship neared a small harbor where they would be reunited with civilization. The pilot and CEO prepared themselves, packing their few belongings and readying to disembark. There was a mix of excitement and apprehension. They had survived isolation and uncertainty together, and now they faced the challenge of returning to their old lives, unsure if their connection could survive in the world beyond the island. Stepping onto the dock, the CEO felt a sense of relief but also a pang of longing for the island. The pilot noticed her pause and offered a reassuring hand. She took it, grateful for the support and comfort it provided. They moved forward together, their steps in sync, navigating the crowd and the curious onlookers who were unaware of the extraordinary story that had just unfolded. Once they were in a quieter space, away from the hustle of the port, they shared a moment alone. Words were unnecessary. The connection between them spoke louder than any expression. The pilot gently took her hand and she allowed herself to squeeze it in return. The trust, care, and affection built on the island had not dissipated. It had only grown stronger. Throughout the day, as they arranged transportation and attended to the necessities of re-entry into civilization, they maintained subtle glances, small touches, and shared smiles that conveyed their growing attachment. They had been through something extraordinary, something that had stripped away pretense and revealed the true nature of who they were to each other. By the end of Part 3, the young pilot and the CEO had been rescued from the island, but the experience had changed them profoundly. They were no longer just a pilot and a passenger. They were partners who had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear together. Their survival had forged a deep bond of trust and care, laying the foundation for a relationship that would continue to grow as they navigated the challenges of returning to everyday life. The island's lessons about patience, courage, reliance, and emotional connection remained with them, guiding the next steps of their journey together. Returning to the busy world after days on a deserted island was a strange and disorienting experience for both the young pilot and the CEO. The noise, the crowds, the schedules, and the constant movement of people felt overwhelming compared to the quiet, raw simplicity of the island. They were back in civilization, but the memories of their time together were vivid and unshakable. The CEO returned to her high-powered role almost immediately. Meetings, calls, and important decisions filled her day. She was efficient, focused, and commanding. Yet beneath her composed exterior, her thoughts kept drifting back to the island and the young pilot who had become her anchor. She found herself replaying moments of their shared struggle, the fire they built together, the way he had guided her through fear, and the quiet conversations by the stream at night. Meanwhile, the pilot resumed his duties, flying planes and managing his schedule. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but he felt a subtle emptiness. The island had shown him a connection he had never experienced before, a bond that was real and profound. He thought about the CEO, about her laughter, her determination, and the way her eyes had shone when they had found fresh water together. He knew that the feelings he had begun to understand there were not just memories. They were a longing he could not ignore. They tried to stay in touch, but reality made it complicated. The CEO's demanding career and his responsibilities made communication difficult. Short messages, brief phone calls, and occasional emails were all they could manage. Each interaction, though limited, was charged with meaning. They laughed over small memories, offered support for stressful situations, and carefully nurtured the bond that had started on the island. But both felt the distance keenly, the physical separation testing the emotional connection they had built. Despite the challenges, both of them found ways to hold on to the lessons learned on the island. The CEO began to see that control was not always necessary, that vulnerability could be strength, and that trusting someone else was not a weakness. She applied this perspective in her work, seeking collaboration rather than dominance, listening more, and trusting her team. The pilot, on the other hand, found himself more open to expressing care and concern, recognizing that emotional connection was just as important as skill or independence. They met occasionally, carefully planning brief encounters between their schedules. Each meeting carried the weight of shared history and unspoken feelings. Even simple gestures, a reassuring touch on the arm, a shared smile, a gentle word, carried a depth that surprised them both. These moments were reminders of what had begun on the island, proof that their connection could survive beyond isolation and danger. The CEO began to reflect on how the experience had changed her understanding of life and relationships. She realized that the young pilot had shown her a side of herself that she rarely acknowledged, a side that could be playful, vulnerable, and deeply connected to another person. In turn, she noticed changes in him too. He was more patient, more expressive, and increasingly aware of the emotional impact of their bond. Meanwhile, both faced external pressures. Friends, colleagues, and family members questioned the closeness developing between them, especially given the difference in their social and professional worlds. The CEO's colleagues viewed her as untouchable, while the pilot's peers respected his skill but did not fully understand the emotional connection he had formed. These pressures tested their resolve, but the memories of the island and the trust they had built gave them strength to persevere. One afternoon, they arranged to meet at a quiet cafe away from the hustle of the city. As they saw each other across the room, a wave of familiarity and comfort washed over them. The CEO smiled, her eyes lighting up in a way that made the pilot's chest tighten. He returned her smile, feeling the same pull he had experienced on the island. Conversation flowed easily, natural and unforced, as if no time had passed since they had last been together. They shared stories of the days since leaving the island, laughing over mundane frustrations and small victories. Yet beneath the humor was a deeper awareness of their feelings. Both of them realized that the bond they had formed in survival was not simply situational, it was real and meaningful. They began to discuss the possibility of exploring a relationship beyond friendship, acknowledging that their lives were complicated but that their connection was worth the effort. At times, uncertainty crept in. The CEO worried about whether she could balance love and career, whether the world they returned to would allow them the freedom to nurture their bond. The pilot, too, worried about how the differences in their lives might affect them, and whether the intensity of their shared experience could survive ordinary life. But each concern was met with patient understanding. They reminded each other of the resilience they had shown on the island and the trust that had carried them through. They found ways to integrate their connection into daily life. Shared meals, brief walks in quiet parks, and late-night calls became their new routines. Each moment reinforced the bond, creating a bridge between the extraordinary experience on the island and the demands of the world they now inhabited. The CEO learned to appreciate small gestures of care, while the pilot embraced the joy of mutual support and companionship. As weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened. The CEO noticed that her laughter had become freer, her steps lighter, and her sense of joy more present. She attributed this to the pilot's steady presence, his unwavering care, and the shared history that no one else could replicate. The pilot noticed a similar change in himself, a softness and openness that contrasted with the focus and discipline of his profession. Their friends began to notice the subtle changes too. There were knowing glances, gentle teasing, and quiet encouragement. Yet both the pilot and the CEO were cautious, determined to let the connection develop naturally rather than rush into declarations or decisions. They valued the depth of trust and respect that had formed on the island, understanding that it could not be forced, only nurtured. One evening, after a particularly long day of work and travel, they found themselves alone on a quiet rooftop overlooking the city lights. The CEO leaned against the railing, reflecting on how far they had come. The pilot stood beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. Without speaking, they shared a moment of quiet acknowledgement, the unspoken understanding that their bond was enduring, that their connection had survived danger, isolation, and the challenges of returning to everyday life. They spoke then, softly and honestly, about the future. There were no grand promises, only mutual acknowledgement of feelings and a willingness to see where their journey might lead. The CEO admitted that she had never imagined feeling this deeply about anyone, and the pilot shared that his feelings had grown beyond admiration and respect. Their words were simple, natural, and full of meaning, reinforcing the emotional connection that had begun on the island. As Part 4 ends, both the young pilot and the CEO are navigating the complexities of returning to normal life, while nurturing a bond forged in extraordinary circumstances. Their connection has grown from survival and trust into a deep, emotional relationship. Challenges remain, differences in lifestyle, external pressures, and the uncertainty of the future, but their shared experiences have created a foundation strong enough to carry them forward. The lessons of patience, trust, and care continue to guide them, preparing them for the next stage of their journey together. The days after their reunion with civilization were filled with a mixture of excitement, normal life, and the quiet tension of unspoken feelings. The CEO had returned to her hectic schedule, moving from one important meeting to the next while the young pilot managed his responsibilities, flying planes and maintaining his daily routines. Yet both found that their thoughts often returned to the island, the place that had changed everything, where fear and survival had led to trust, respect, and the first sparks of affection. It was a Friday afternoon when the CEO decided to reach out to the pilot for a chance to meet outside their routines. They agreed to meet at a quiet park near the edge of the city. The pilot arrived first, pacing slightly as he waited, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had grown used to handling pressure in flight, but this situation was different. It was personal, emotional, and unpredictable. The CEO arrived soon after, her presence commanding yet soft, a combination of her natural confidence and a gentleness that had grown over the weeks since the island. They exchanged smiles, a silent recognition of the journey they had shared. Words felt unnecessary at first. The warmth of familiarity and trust filled the space between them. They walked along the park paths, sharing small talk that gradually moved into more meaningful conversation. The CEO spoke about the pressures of her work, the decisions she had to make, and the moments when she felt overwhelmed. The pilot listened, offering insight and quiet encouragement, reminding her gently of her strength and resilience. She appreciated his perspective, realizing how much she valued his calm, steady presence. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, they found a bench overlooking a small lake. The reflection of the sunset on the water created a peaceful atmosphere, and they sat together, shoulders brushing lightly, neither wanting to break the moment. The CEO broke the silence first, admitting that she had thought often about what had happened on the island, about the way they had worked together, cared for each other, and shared moments of vulnerability. She confessed that she felt something stronger than friendship, something that had grown naturally from their shared experiences. The pilot turned to her, meeting her gaze with honesty and warmth. He admitted that he had felt the same way, that the connection formed in survival had developed into genuine care and affection. He spoke of the quiet moments on the island, the shared challenges, and the way they had supported each other. His words were simple but heartfelt, creating a space where both could feel safe to express their feelings without fear or hesitation. They sat together in silence for a moment, letting the weight of their admissions settle. The CEO reached out, taking his hand in hers. The gesture was both gentle and firm, a physical confirmation of the emotional bond they had acknowledged. The pilot held her hand, feeling a warmth and connection that went beyond words. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the beauty of the setting sun and the calm of the park, they both understood that this was the beginning of a new chapter. Over the next few weeks, they navigated their new relationship with care. The CEO introduced the pilot to her world gradually, sharing insights into her career and inviting him to events and meetings. He adapted, not as someone seeking to change her life, but as a partner who supported her ambitions while maintaining his own identity. They learned to balance their different lifestyles, respecting each other's routines while carving out time for connection and intimacy. The pilot, in turn, shared more of his life with her, his love for flying, the challenges he had faced as a young professional, and the lessons he had learned from the island experience. The CEO listened with genuine interest, valuing his perspective and the humility he displayed despite his skills and accomplishments. Their conversations were open, honest, and often filled with laughter, the kind of laughter that comes from comfort and mutual understanding. As their bond grew stronger, they faced challenges typical of any new relationship. There were moments of doubt, moments when work pressures threatened to take priority, and moments when their different worlds seemed difficult to reconcile. Yet each challenge was met with patience, communication, and a willingness to compromise. They relied on the trust and respect they had built on the island, using it as a foundation to navigate the complexities of their everyday lives. One evening, the CEO invited the pilot to a quiet dinner at her home. They cooked together, laughing over minor mistakes and enjoying the simple pleasure of being in each other's company. After dinner, they sat on the balcony, looking at the city lights stretching out below them. The conversation turned reflective, discussing dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. The CEO spoke of her desire for balance, to maintain her career while embracing personal happiness. The pilot shared his own aspirations, emphasizing that the most important thing was being able to support and grow with someone he cared for deeply. As the night deepened, they found themselves closer, their hands brushing, their shoulders touching. The CEO rested her head lightly on the pilot's shoulder, and he instinctively wrapped an arm around her. There was no rush, no urgency, just a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they shared and the comfort it brought. In that moment, the world outside ceased to matter, and they were simply two people who had found each other under extraordinary circumstances. Days later, they took a short trip together, choosing a quiet coastal town where they could enjoy time away from the demands of work. They walked along the beach, shared meals at small cafes, and explored the town with a sense of freedom. The pilot taught her small things about navigating the sea and appreciating nature, while the CEO introduced him to the joys of slow, mindful living. Their connection deepened further, rooted in shared experiences, trust, and the genuine enjoyment of each other's company. Returning from the trip, they faced the realities of their busy lives again, but the experience strengthened their relationship. They had seen each other in moments of vulnerability, had supported one another through challenges, and had grown together in ways